When I was taking writing classes, I read this story about an alien landing and this one guy who didn't believe in God. And then it turned out the aliens had the same God stories as ours, the same beliefs. And the guy, the atheist, he didn't know what to make about that. I don't know if I really believed in God. I went to church with my parents, and then when we moved back close to Ellen's parents, it just kind of dropped off. And I never thought about it again until we were getting the boys baptized. That just seemed like a safe bet. Like we might as well do it just in case. And we could tell the church people and Ellen's parents were hoping it was going to be a little riptide that would carry us back to church every Sunday. But I guess we wrote it out, and we never really did go back. Now I wonder. I think about that story. I think about the stories I heard growing up: water into wine, loaves and fishes, and apostles and Pontius Pilate. None of us even had a chance to hear your stories, to see if they are the same as ours, or if you're making up new ones, or if you have stories at all. Maybe this will be one of your new stories: the man who got away for 6 days until he got zapped, or the man who made it home to his wife and children and everybody was safe and sound, or the man who is in a coma in some hospital right now, dreaming about an apocalypse. Neo plugged into the Matrix. Everything really just ones and zeros.
Dave Housley is a founding editor of Barrelhouse Magazine and is the author of 10 books of fiction. His latest book is Aliens Attack, now out with Mason Jar Press. Dave, how did I do with the exclamation mark? Could you hear it in the title there?
I could definitely hear it. That was perfect.
Great. Aliens Attack is a literary novel and short stories that chronicles some of what happens when the planet of Anthea invades Earth to kill off its inhabitants and claim the water-rich planet as its new home. This invasion makes the messy lives of the people being invaded messier, as one can imagine. Through the various points of view of numerous characters, including a couple about to break up, a couple that becomes separated and trying to get home, and an intergalactic divorce between Antheans, Aliens Attack is a sensitive, smart, and chaotic tale that elevates its inspirational source material. Congrats on writing such a wonderful book, Dave.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
I love pop culture, and I love literature, and I love when, obviously, when I say I love pop culture, when I curate it for myself and find the stuff I love. I don't know about you. Growing up in the 70s, I absorbed so much crap that
Absolutely.
it's embarrassing. But some of it stands out as being really transformative. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how this project came about. As I mentioned before, we started recording here. In theory, I'm a big fan of your book, Massive Cleansing Fire, in which all the stories entail a massive cleansing fire. So it seems like there might be a prompt at work, or there certainly is a scheme at work and how to create a book of stories like this.
Those two books are really similar, actually, and they both started out as writing projects where I thought I'll write a set of short stories all based around this idea. Um, Massive Cleansing Fire was really because Mike Ingram, who's someone I think you know from the podcast Book Fight, um, told me I couldn't end two stories with a massive cleansing fire. He said, I feel like that's something you can do once. And that's like you have that move one time to end a story in a way that seems like it's really like something big and important happened. Um, and I thought, I wonder if I could just end a whole lot of stories that way. So that Mike actually inadvertently gave me the prompt for that. And this one, it started off as a writing project, and it was to write a collection of short stories that were all set during an alien invasion. Um, and initially, they were all from the Earthling point of view, the humans. Um, and then I had maybe a core set of like six or seven kind of traditional literary
Mhm.
short fiction set during an alien invasion. And they had the connective tissue of the alien ships were the same. There are these kind of beat up Zeppelins as opposed to fancy UFOs. um, so they had a little bit of connective tissue in the kind of some of the details around the invasions, and they were kind of separate stories. Um, and I started to think of, could I start sending this out to places and see if someone will publish it? And the stories didn't quite hang together. So I wrote the longer story, The Road to Phillipsburg, which takes one of the characters from, I think it's the second story in the book, and
That's
that story ends
the
with,
children.
yes, the children, and that story ends with him kind of stranded. His family has driven off and left him in this McDonald's, with a bunch of bikers who have decided just to get drunk because it's the end of the world. Um, so I took him and wrote a longer story about him trying to get back home, um, which kind of is in between all the stories. And then I wrote one alien story. This kind of, I call it a sad spaceman story about this this alien Otho who he gets stuck on this outpost. He doesn't make it into the invasion. Um, and he's sad and he misses his wife. And I sent that the I'd been sending that version of the book out, getting kind of steady rejection as you do. And Mason Jar Press was interested in it. They were kind of restarting their operation after kind of taking about a year off. The uh, editors changed hands, and you know how small presses work. This kind of a new group came in and was moving it along. Um, and Sarah Daniels is the managing editor there, and it was Sarah's suggestion really that she kind of said, "Hey, wouldn't wouldn't this be better if you wrote five more alien stories?" And it was the kind of suggestion where you hear it and you're like, "Oh shit, that's a really good idea." Um, and I just knew right away, like when you get really good editorial feedback, you're like, "Shit, I absolutely have to do that." Um,
Sometimes an editor seems to understand our project better than we do. And we're like, oh,
yeah,
that was, yeah.
yeah, and I have to give Sarah so much credit. She was really a collaborator on this book. The final book um is really different from the book that I sent to them. Because it was also her idea to break the sad spaceman story, which is called I'm Happy, Hope You're Happy Too, to break that up into four chunks and kind of to bounce back and forth between the aliens and the humans. And I think the resulting book is much more like a novel in stories than the story collection that I had imagined. Um, and we also went back and really wrote a lot of connective tissue into them. Um, so all the stories that were standalone stories are now pretty well connected. The characters all kind of, most of them have relationships with each other. Most of them live in the same neighborhood. Um, so it wound up being really a different book than the one that I sent off to Mason Jar Press. And I'm really grateful for the collaboration with Sarah and for everything she added into the overall structure of the book.
One thing I love about it, and it's like, okay, the first test of this book is is Dave making fun of the alien invasion genre? Or is he treating it like it's worthy material? If you're going to satirize it, that's good for maybe 2 pages. It's not good
Hmm.
for a book length manuscript. And even though I don't know if someone said, hey, would you write a novelization of Independence Day? My civilized response would be, fuck no. No, there's no way I could shove myself in that book. But as a genre, I do feel like whatever it is that we take on, that we owe ourselves and our readers the best stories we can tell. So I wonder if
Yeah,
you could talk a little bit about wanting to write an alien invasion story, what your history with the genre or subgenre is, and how you thought about that working through the book.
I'm a child of the 70s and the 80s. I'm 59. So I was 10 when Star Wars came out. So that was really what kind of turned me on to the whole idea. Um, that, like millions of people kind of blew my mind, and changed kind of the way I interacted with pop culture and
Mm-hmm.
really opened up kind of the world of science fiction for me. Um, and the thing I really love about that movie is how beat up everything is and lived in. Um, it wasn't, the like I said, shiny, brand new UFOs. It was like, oh, this is actually trying to tell us kind of some real people's lives in this amid all this, lasers and stuff. Um, and that was kind of part of this project. Obviously, I was writing, what I kind of considered literary short fiction, the kind of stuff that I'm sending out to literary magazines. Um, so at its heart, there's sad fuck ups, basically, kind of, you know, demonstrating how, sad and what kind of fuck ups they are in particular. Um, and it just happened to happen during an alien invasion. Um, the other thing I think that this book really has in common with the Massive Cleansing Fire project is that it's very much an end of the world book. Tara Campbell, who's a friend of mine, wrote a blurb and she said, "Who would you be at the end of the world?" And that was really the writing project that I was taking on. So it's that idea plus the opportunity to write, a literary short fiction writer doesn't have an opportunity to write a lot about zeppelins shooting you lasers and blowing up Starbucks. So that part was pretty fun. Um, and then the alien stories um, are really kind of straight up. It's interesting because the alien stories are sad fuck up stories without the lasers and the UFOs. They're really kind of traditional, I think, literary short fiction. They just have these Antheans who have gotten everything they want and are still unhappy, basically, which I think is kind of what we do a lot of times in literary short fiction or, literary writing.
I imagine, and I don't want to go, I don't know, too political, not because it's not worthy, but because I don't want to be that depressed talking to you. But Republicans won the last presidential election, which has not led, it's led to some gloating. It's not led to, like, it seems to me, mass joy or mass, even calm that their side won. Like, they're just as angry as if they didn't win.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the alien stories were written last year mostly. Um, when it, yeah, I didn't really I did, I guess I did this intuitively, but a lot of last year felt like we were being invaded. Um, and all of that came out on the kind of the Anthean side of it. So that part I didn't really set out to make a very obvious corollary, but obviously that came through.
Well, I shared the first story with a group of my students. Now, I teach creative writing, but not literary creative writing, mind you.
Mm,
These are kids who they're into science fiction, they're into fantasy. They want to get paid for their writing. They don't want to be
good
literary
for
writers.
good for them. Yeah.
And so I don't show them enough writing. And I thought, okay, there's this brand new book with, there's a corny premise in there, even though it doesn't feel corny when we see it executed. And partly I'm testing them, and partly I was testing the work. And because it's literary fiction, it's what we call character-driven fiction, which means, okay, story is about goals, like character trying to achieve a goal. And in literary fiction, it's okay if we just hint how the goal turned out. Whereas outside of literary fiction, it's like, no, you owe me the ending. Give me the damn ending. And I can report that my students were so gripped by the tense moments created, in which the aliens is just like one component
Yeah.
of lives that are coming apart. They were not furious that they
Okay.
weren't given a buttoned up ending to this story.
That's cool. Thanks for telling me that. That is the hard part of writing um science fiction or crime. Um, y the plot really has to make sense. You have to be able to end it. It's not like a short story where, the joke is always you can just look up at the moon and then end your story, right? Um, can't really do that when you're writing science fiction or crime or any genre, I think.
You owe people something that feels like an ending.
Absolutely.
I think that your characterization is so strong that like the students were just locked in. And also it's, in our assessing their assessment, right? It was one short story
Yeah.
of medium length. So it wasn't, asking them to read a novel where they might not have uh, a lack of ambiguity about okay, what happens next
Yeah.
exactly.
That's cool. Thanks for doing that and letting me know about it. I really appreciate that.
You've got the two extended bits, the Road to Phillipsburg and then the um, Chronicles
I'm
of,
happy.
Otho,
Mhm.
which quotes the Bowie's Space Oddity. And uh, if this is a novel, like I'm actually skeptical when people go, "Oh, it's a novel and stories." I'm like, "Oh, so it's a bunch of stories." Got it.
Mhm.
Like Dubliners is not a novel. Sorry,
Yeah.
but because of those two extended stories, and I do think they create the sort of parallel weight together through no fault, deliberate fault of their own. They're separated from their families, and I felt like that was an interesting balance, and that's where I feel confident in saying this is a novel, not because the stories have these sort of tendrils that touch, but because
Mhm.
no, like these are spines going through the book. Do you feel like those two stories influenced each other while you were writing?
Yeah,
And
I think so. And I did write them at about the same time. And I know, having talked about the book a little bit and kind of, I'm reacquainting myself with it. Um, the idea of regret, at the end of the world and kind of not realizing what you had before is definitely an idea that's pretty strong throughout this book, I think. And because it is end of the world stories, and I think that that's one thing people and aliens would have in common about that moment. Um, and even the aliens who do make it to Earth and kind of have it made seem like they've got one has very distinct regrets about the really terrible place where he lived on Anthea. Um, but they all have kind of regrets about what they've left behind, I would say. And that's definitely an idea that is interesting to me, and I think was something I was playing around with in all of these stories too.
one story that kind of stuck out to me is The End of the World as We Know It. And it's at a point in the book where maybe the book could get tired. Uh, I'm obsessed with story structure. I think because through so much of my life I've sucked so bad at structure that like I'm obsessed with okay, like what are the proportions here, right? Like in a movie, okay,
Hmm.
when does Act One turn into Act Two, and how does that change things? And so, and you probably weren't thinking about this as a movie, despite the fact that movies had to have been in your mind with an alien invasion story, since it seems like there are a ton of movies, and I'm sure there are some books, but not nearly as many as there are
Absolutely.
prominent films. But I felt like at a point where, what's interesting about a project like this is I think you can get away with more ambiguity in terms of how stories resolve because most of your audience has seen multiple alien invasion movies.
Hmm.
So we don't want the standard version. We need the non standard version. And the way some of this is going to play out, we can already tell. So that you get to make, I think, as a literary writer, without violating, right, the storytelling rules, uh, you can show less than you might have to show if this were, I don't know, the first alien invasion movie.
Yeah.
So what was interesting to me is at a point where I'm like, okay, Uh, is this going to uh, get crushed under its own weight as a pop culture artifact? Uh, you gave us aging hipsters who, for lack of a better phrase, like they realized the failure of postmodernism at the end of their own lives. And the idea of referencing, ironically or not ironically or semi ironically, or maybe it's a double irony, I don't know, but just the quoting of things that are ubiquitous as if you're above it, or it's silly that you live in a world in which such references are just automatic, um, ultimately isn't satisfying for them. So that seemed to be you taking your postmodernism card and you going, yeah, we're not doing that. Like it exists and we're not doing that. Am I, is that something of the spirit that you felt working on that story?
Yeah. Well, that story, and there, I don't think you need to know this. I actually read that story. We had a book launch here in State College, Pennsylvania, and I actually read that story. And I told the folks there, I live in a college town, so there were some college students. But those are the characters from the movie Reality Bites. Um, they're for some reason I was trying to write that story and I wanted to do something with this idea of nostalgia, which I'm finding, I guess this is normal, but as I get older, finding a lot of my kind of colleagues, compatriots really publicly engaging in nostalgia for things that mostly sucked too. Um, like, oh, don't you remember Salisbury steaks? Um, and I just think it's interesting because we're supposed to be the kind of grin and bear it and never talk about it Generation X. So I was kind of playing around with this idea of nostalgia, and obviously we know what's going to happen in this story because it's one of these core stories in the alien invasion. Um, and then I think it was on Twitter at the time. I tweeted something like story hack. What if this story actually? What if the characters in the story were the characters from Reality Bites? Um, and then I thought maybe that would actually work. So I did change it so it's those four people from the movie, and it starts with them watching the documentary that she makes in the
Yeah.
movie Reality Bites. Um, so and then I did kind of purposefully have them, talking about some memes, um, and some kind of very Gen X-y kind of what I thought would be kind of, memories that people would have, and kind of saying like I think one character literally does say this is the end of the world and you're talking about stupid memes. Um, so I did want to purposely mess around with that idea, and I thought having it be those characters in particular would be fun. It was fun for me to write, and my friend Aaron Birch, who's the editor of Had, and Short Story Long. So that story appeared in Short Story Long, which is Aaron's kind of Substack-based literary magazine. Um, when he was editing it, he he said, "Remember that Troy sucks. Like you can probably have fun with the idea that Troy sucks, which is the Ethan Hawke character, um, who uh, Winona Ryder's character winds up with him, and a lot of people in my generation have now realized that he sucked, and she went with the wrong guy in that movie. Um, so Aaron was fun. He was like, you can do a little more. Troy can suck a little more here. So that's how Troy came to really suck. And he's kind of just he's singing "It's the End of the World as We Know It," and he's talking about these, he's basically talking in Gen X memes that I see on Facebook every day. Um, so it was that one was a really fun one, but you're definitely right that I was kind of trying to play around with those ideas in that story.
I'm from that period. I went preppy outwardly at that time, and inwardly, I don't know, maybe I was too Gen X for me to latch on to Gen X as a movement.
That's the most Gen X thing. Yes.
Uh, or we could just say I've been a grumpy fuck for a long time. That's another way to put it. I do remember what I saw. I saw Reality Bites in the theater, and yeah, I was kind of horrified
Hmm.
by what I watched. And I'm like, so the Ethan Hawke character, his epiphany, his growth, his arc is, oh, I don't have to treat women like whores.
Yeah, he sucks.
I could actually date someone I respect and like. Huh. And
And be nice to her.
and yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
or at least be normal. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to go so far to say the other guy like it would have been right for her either. I think
Yeah, Ben
that's
Stiller,
yeah, the Ben Stiller character, and the point is he's playing kind of a corporate douche. Well, he's playing a
for
corporate
sure.
douche in that movie. Like,
Yeah.
if you had to choose someone, all right, then you choose the Ben Stiller character. But it's like
Yeah.
there's got to be more than those two options.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Uh,
And maybe it filled me with rage as well because I think I was in danger of becoming the kind of character who would snidely make a pop culture reference as if that were a great act of creation.
yeah. That idea was the thing that was kind of stuck in my head. Because I feel like I'm seeing it more and more from people my age. So I wanted to kind of poke around at that a little bit in that story.
Well, I completely missed that it was Reality Bites, but it felt appropriate for the period, even if I didn't catch that it was leaning so heavily on that.
Yeah, I was hoping that it still makes sense. And this is what I said to the 19-year-olds who were at my book launch. Like, I don't think you need to know the movie in order to kind of follow what's happening in the story. But if you do, then there's a little extra there for folks who do recognize the movie.
Did this start as like one story and then become a bunch?
Yeah, it started the first story in the book is the first one I wrote. And this is such a stupid kind of germ of a way to start what wound up being, a novel and stories or a novel. But at Barrel House, we used to do a thing called the Stupid Idea Junk Drawer, where we would give people prompts for stories or poems. We just kind of give a prompt. And if somebody chose to write it, they could submit it directly to the person who came up with the prompt. And then if we liked it, we would publish it on our website. Um, we should probably do it again. It was really fun. But there's one that I made up. One of the prompts was Carver story set during an alien invasion. Um, and I actually realized I really wrote two of them for this book. The first one is just titled What We Talk About When We Talk About Aliens. Um, but so that was the first one, and I really wrote it kind of in response to my own prompt because I just kind of thought that idea was an interesting idea. Um, and that's why it kind of starts with this domestic. It's this
Hmm.
domestic setting where this guy's um, planning to break up with his wife. And then the alien invasion happens and they kind of get really sucked out into a lot of plot involving like real science fiction stuff with an alien, but at the heart of it he's still thinking about breaking up with her the whole time. So that was the first one. And then I do like writing projects like the Massive Cleansing Fire book. I wrote a book of stories that were based on television commercials too. That was called Commercial Fiction, and I just a couple of years ago published. I know, really clever, right? Um, I published a book of stories with Had and Aaron Birch based on Looney Tunes. So I like kind of little odd writing projects. And with the what we talk about when we talk about aliens story written, I kept on just thinking about it. Kind of just hits a bunch of the stuff that I like to work with, which is the science fiction, the alien attack. I really like science fiction, and I think there's some interesting, well, lately we've been kind of hearing a lot about aliens very likely existing. Um, and the idea of end of the world stories is something that appealed to me too. So I just thought, oh, this is something I could kind of work with. And it was interesting hearing you say that what the end of the world as we know it story kind of comes at a point where you're thinking maybe this is kind of getting starting to wilt a little bit,
I
this
didn't say
idea.
that, Dave. I did not say
Okay.
that. But I did.
Well,
This is the exact thought. If the book is going to start to suck, it will be now.
yeah. Well,
And it
I
didn't.
did feel like there was a certain amount of wind in the sails, you know, and it was six or seven, medium-sized short stories. That's about how much meat I thought was on the bone. Um, and then the other ones kind of the other kinds of stories came later. When I was trying to think about first, how do I make this hang together and kind of be enough to be a collection I could start sending out to places? Um, and then just really digging into the alien side of it and building in more connective tissue. But it really, the whole germ of it came from that stupid idea junk drawer. Um, in that first story I wrote. That's how I got started on the whole thing.
I love prompts for so many reasons. Maybe the biggest one being no matter what you write, working on a prompt, since the expectation should be this won't turn into anything,
Hmm.
that it's all gravy. Like, and you can set about problem solving without having to think, all right, I earned this expensive degree, fucking earn it. Come on, come on. Instead, it's like, let me take this transitory idea that could be great, but doesn't necessarily have to be anything special. And then I find when I work on things like that, my mind kind of empties out
Hmm.
and my ego empties out. And it's just me and the fun of writing and trying to solve a couple of problems at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is too, 99% of the time I'm bringing kind of my regular bullshit into it, so it's a way to get started and have fun. And I know that for me, even if I'm writing a story that's based on Daffy Duck, um, it's going to have the things that I'm kind of concerned about, sad about, things I'm kind of thinking about right now. They're gonna worm their way into that story somehow. Um, so it, I think prompts are great in that way. Everything you said of just kind of being able to start fresh, um, just kind of play around with something, have fun. Um, I think that's really underrated. Trying to have fun, amuse yourself, kind of crack yourself up, think, can I do this? Can I write a story that, is based on an Elmer Fudd cartoon or kind of this pretty crazy idea of a person in a situation? Where do we go from here?
My published novel kind of began like that. I had this list. I've got a character. His name is Guy Psycho. And I came up with a list of, I've got a list of maybe 50 different possible titles, Indiana Jones style titles. Guy Psycho and this, Guy Psycho and that. And so one of the juiciest ones was Guy Psycho and the Ziggurat of Shame. And I'm like, that sounds like a book that should exist. That
I love it.
and when I got to my MFA program, I thought, well, I better write something new. Let me try this new thing. Let me try this ridiculous thing. Dave, I didn't know what a ziggurat was. Like, so I had to figure out what story can I even tell based on. It's not even a premise, just the title. Just the title. How can I build a novel out of this? And um, I figured it out. It took
That's
it took some
fantastic.
time, and there were struggles, but when it was fun, it was maybe the most fun thing I've ever written.
That's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, I think fun is underrated in writing projects, especially kind of giving yourself a fun project. Um, it's fun. I wrote a novel with my friend Becky Barnard And that's probably the most fun I've ever had writing because we were both trying to crack each other up. We would bounce back and forth, and it was really fun to write something that I thought would make her laugh, and then she would do the same to me.
I hesitate to ask if Alien Attack was fun. I think trying to figure out the clunky science fiction stuff and the beat up Zeppelins, yeah, those, uh, like if Star Wars didn't exist, that's the kind of thing, I don't know, George Lucas with, that is the kind of thing that could have been in THX, right? Maybe not Star
Yes.
Wars, but in THX,
Yeah.
these beat up Zeppelins with the weird uh, ideograms or whatever language is appearing
Yeah.
on the sides of them, and this odd technology that both is and isn't classic science fiction.
Yeah, it was fun to try to kind of make up some lore. Um, and then on the alien side, it was fun to try to kind of play around with the idea of are are they us or are they not? Are they almost like a save as civilization? They're so much like us. Um, so it was fun to play around with that too.
Getting a look behind the scenes of the Anthean invasion, I'm reminded of the Watergate tapes, and you're just appalled. Like, wait, this was the fucking government. This, and yeah, they come up with a pretext for why human beings aren't humans, and uh, is maybe there's nothing more human than that. Is coming up with a reason for why some humans are not humans and therefore have no human rights.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, that part of it was written last year. So everything about that probably makes sense to you.
Oh yeah, no, just I
Yeah.
I have to keep imagining. Okay, what was Nixon like, and now okay, and now let's bring the IQ like way down on
Yeah.
all the components.
Yeah. Yeah. I for those that that was kind of fun to, like I said, to kind of establish that lore and play around with a couple questions about are they us? Is this like a Planet of the Apes scenario? Um, that was fun to play around with, and then the aliens themselves, obviously, were like I said, kind of traditional, sad regret uh, stories about a person in a situation who should have everything that they want, but they're just still not happy. So they wound up being pretty traditional literary short fiction stories, I think.
What it reminds me of some of those 1950s films where it's like all right, we're traveling. Oh, we're on Mars. Okay, and then they meet people, and you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, oh, they're aliens, I guess, but
That came out of, I think, in one of the first stories. Somebody just says it kind of casually, they look like people. And I thought, oh, that would be the scariest thing if you have no idea what's going on and then you hear that. That would be way scarier than they look like giant squids or, the kind of gray aliens. It would give you all these other questions about what's happening to you.
well, I think of the 1953 War of the Worlds, where
Yeah.
you never see a full alien. You see like a green or purple tentacle. I forget what color, but you barely see them at all. And seeing them, I wasn't scared. I thought, oh, look at those vulnerable creatures. Like they're killing
Yeah.
everybody. So they got scary technology, but they themselves look so vulnerable. Like what little we get to see of them.
Hmm. That was one of the kind of core movies I was thinking about when I was writing the Alien, kind of creating that lore of what are these ships like, who are these aliens, why are they here? That was one of the core kind of reference points for me just in my brain when I was doing that.
And it brings up so many cultural questions of politics and religion. Like maybe the best scene in War of the Worlds is when the minister before they could start unloading all these weapons on the alien aircraft, goes out to try and pray to it. Because to him, the idea of just going to war with this thing we don't understand, all out war, he would rather die. He
Yeah.
then just let that happen without trying peace.
Yep.
In a movie that's sometimes great and sometimes okay, it's a movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen it for a while, and it's kind of a standard invasion scenario, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Looks a little better than a cheap B movie. You know, it's in Technicolor.
Mm.
The acting's a little better, not a ton better. You mentioned, yeah, this could be an entry in what we would call loser lit. Uh, that's a subgenre of literature storytelling that I don't know if it's an established subgenre. If maybe I should make it so,
I think so. Yeah.
but there's a lot of people struggling a lot here and a lot of pain in the book and a lot of confusion on behalf of people who, well, like most adults over 30, wonder how did I get here?
Yeah.
How did I become me like this? This is not something I could have imagined. And there's a lot of dramatic work. Do you think the fun of the premise made it easier to express so much, uh, to explore so many painful aspects of being a human?
The fun of the premise, it kind of allowed me to, you know, write some really like traditional UFO alien invasion stuff. There's giant zeppelin shooting lasers at the Starbucks. Um, but there's still end of the world stories. And I love the way you said that. Like, how did this, how did I get to be this, like me right now? Um, I think that's something that I like writing about in general, kind of people who are having that realization, um, or realizing something about themselves and their situation. And if you add kind of the end of the world onto that, um, I think it can be really interesting. It gives you a lot of opportunities. You don't have to. Um, I guess it's easier to get there because we're at the end of the world. And I think naturally people would have those kind of regrets and thoughts and like, how the hell did I get here? This is not what I pictured. Um, so I think the prompt or the basic setup allowed me to kind of get there pretty quickly and do it again and again and again. And hopefully there's enough variance that it doesn't feel like kind of a writer making the same writer move, in many successive chapters. Hopefully they're all different. And try to start with, I always try to start with like person in a situation. Um, and knowing that I was kind of try to do this, let's say between 6 and 10 different times, allow me to really work and say, well, this has to be a really different person in a different situation here, even if it's kind of a relationship story. Um, so yeah, I think it was a fun premise to start with, and like I said, I think there's a certain amount of meat on the bones for those core stories, and then playing around with it and trying to come at it from very different angles, including the Antheans, was hopefully um, really makes it more of a book that hangs together and can kind of be thought of as a novel or a novel in stories too.
A lot of the work is moving, including moments with characters who I wouldn't relate to, which is why I hate the adjective relatable. It's fucking worthless. It's a
Hmm.
garbage word for a creative writer.
Absolutely,
It's a garbage word.
100%.
Um, like, can I identify with that character? Well, I can if Dave Housley writes that character.
Oh, thank
I
you.
don't need the character to. to be exactly like me. So, right, there's a QAnon zealot, and nothing can stop what is happening. There's a man who has Alzheimer's or dementia, um, trying to, yeah, he's trying to figure out how to work the TV while there's
Yeah.
an alien invasion going on, and he's confused about several things at once, and yet has a lot on his mind. In some ways, this is just a chronicle of how hard it is to get any fucking thing done in this world.
Yeah.
And, they joked a bit that early on, like, oh, their messy lives become messier when the aliens invade. And yet, I do mean that on a dramatic level as well. Like, I can feel the pain of these characters and their own, because they all have their own goals. I feel like it has a drive. Because the one thing, like, I guess I'm depressive. I'm Gen X. Like, but I also don't want to just bear witness to suffering indefinitely. And
Hmm.
that's not a fault you have, asking us to bear witness to suffering without there being a point or without the drive of narrative. Because you do that Roland Emmerich thing better than Roland Emmerich, but that's not a compliment, really. That's
Okay.
that's a basic observation. But it's like, oh, and then over here we got this character, and over here we got that character. Here's a woman about to get married, and she's wondering what the hell is happening with her groom, who has this very unusual relationship with the pastor. And then we've got, uh, this woman who is going into political ecstasy because JFK Jr. is going to be resurrected right here on the grassy
Yeah.
knoll when the aliens arrive, which could be hysterical. And you actually got me to care about this QAnon nut, even though I'm so sickened by the discourse because I know everything wrong with it. And yet you get so into her character. You're writing a character who I suspect you don't share much with politically.
Hmm.
That, but you're writing with enough empathy and care.
Thank you. Well, it's not interesting to make fun of someone, right? As a writer.
Not for long.
I mean, not for long. You can't, yeah, it that project isn't um as interesting as thinking, how did this person get here? Because there was a normal kind of person there at some point in time. And like, what is it like to be in her head? Um, so I think I've done a lot of projects where the question is like kind of what if that was real? Like the Looney Tunes project and the commercial fiction one. Um, I think that's the more interesting project than to say like, oh, let me make fun of this person or this idea. I think, what if that was real and real human beings were living inside this television commercial, this Budweiser commercial, What would that be like after the commercial's over? Um, I think that's an interesting project. Or this QAnon. I'm really glad you said that it made you kind of care about what happens to her, because I'm really interested in the question of how does somebody get from point A to point Q, I guess we can say. But how did what happened to this person? How did they, what was the first little push towards this? Then how did they keep on kind of almost getting this protective layer over themselves, to where there's not that initial person is kind of no longer here mentally. And that was my attempt at trying to see what a version of that would be like. And I did get kind of into QAnon in the pandemic, in the sense that I was following a lot of QAnon people on Twitter, watching how they reacted to things. It kind of helped me to see how out there they were. And it's also just fascinating seeing people become so deluded and just keep on doubling down. Um, so I wanted to kind of show a person who had, it starts off she's at Dealey Plaza, but I didn't like that part wasn't as interesting as the part that tried to show how a person might get from that initial push to keep on kind of covering themselves in whatever protective beliefs that they kind of come to believe until they're kind of not there anymore. She never does realize that it's aliens and not JFK
Yeah.
Jr. or RFK or yeah, JFK Jr. Um, she's still kind of going deeper and deeper even as that moment's happening. That's what I was trying to do with that project. So it's nice to hear that you even felt some sympathy for her.
I think I started off annoyed, but
That's
you built so much goodwill in me as a reader that I'm like, okay, I'm not going to stay annoyed. Like, this isn't just to
okay.
annoy me.
Yeah.
And part of me is judgmental of myself. Like, why am I so annoyed? Why is this character unworthy of being in a story? There's a detail that made me sad for her. She keeps referring to her friends who are there,
Yeah.
and she refers to people by their handles.
Yeah.
These aren't IRL friends, even though they might be their IRL, but she knows them primarily through handles, which means the mediation of her internet friendships have supplanted her family relationships that have really corroded under the influence of her radicalization. I
Yeah.
even saying it that way makes it sound dehumanizing. Like it makes it sound less chaotic than it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad that stuck out. They all have new identities, and that's the only thing they know is this new identity.
This collective excitement for this extreme thing that's about to happen. When I see anything like that, part of me feel like even if it's something I think might be a good thing, I'm wary. I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, all right. I hope this works out. I hope this works out. Most of the stories are written in present tense. Tell my writers don't do that, but it's because there are writers who are just looking to judge them and not publish them based on not following the standard tense for fiction. Uh, in this case, these are characters in a state of emergency, not with a narrator who can hint that, oh, and they've had time to reflect and like, no, this is the emergency is happening like an inch from our eyeballs sometimes. Could you talk a little bit about how that influenced your writing style?
It gives something an immediacy, obviously, and that's a part of these stories. I also think kind of a really strong first person. Most of these are, I think, are first person, maybe all of them. Um, Allows you to do that thing where ideally what the reader sees is something about the distance between how this person thinks they're kind of moving in the world and how they actually are, how they're being received and how they actually are. Um, I find that's easiest in first person when you can get some kind of voice going and really show that dissonance between, oh, this person thinks that this is one thing that's happening, but there's really a really different thing that's happening about their way that they're kind of moving in the world. Um, I think that project is usually easier in first person. There's a Flannery O'Connor story called Enoch and the Ape, um, and it's part of Wise Blood, her novel. Um, but that does a really great job of this guy sees a guy dressed up like an ape. People are reacting to him like they're delighted to see this ape. So the guy in the story, Enoch, goes and beats the guy up and puts the ape suit on. And then he goes out and expects that people are going to be delighted to see him, but they're terrified and they run away. Um, which I think is I always tell people when I do workshops, like there's a certain kind of story that's like a putting on the ape suit story, and there's a lot of putting on the ape suit stories in this book where the difference between how someone is trying to present themselves and the way they actually are is actively having the opposite reaction that they're going for, and the exact opposite of what they think is happening, basically. Um, so I think that was kind of what I was trying to do in a couple of these stories. There are a couple shitty guy stories in here, right? So I think that's easier to do in first person too.
So, a lot of my listeners haven't worked for a literary magazine.
Hmm.
And I feel like when I worked for literary magazines, it really opened my eyes about so many things as a writer. And most magazines need readers, which means if you want to work for a literary magazine, you probably can, like not get paid, but you could do a little service for a literary magazine. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experience working with literary magazines and how that's affected your writing life.
Well, I'm one of the founding editors at Barrel House, which we still do a print literary magazine. Um, we also run a small press. We publish about 2 to 4 books a year. We mostly what I do is I run our conference, which is held at American University. Actually, it's going to be in 2 weeks, in April 18th, and we do a writing retreat um, here in Central Pennsylvania. But we started as a magazine, and that was my editorial experience is all with the magazine. Reading submissions. I was one of our fiction editors for a really long time, and it was just absolutely foundational in my own growth as a writer, in my, I would say, ability to kind of manage the publication process. The fact that you're just going to be rejected constantly. I mean, this book was rejected about 20 times. It's a different version. This book is different than the one I was sending out, and it's better, but it got rejected at least 20 times. And this wasn't a book that I was going to send to every publisher. It's a pretty weird little book. So even among the group of weird publishers that publish literary fiction, the it was a much smaller group that I was even considering sending this book to. So it got rejected plenty. But I always tell people, especially young writers, when I have a chance to talk to them, that working at a literary magazine, and you almost surely won't get paid. None of us get paid at Barrel House, but it'll almost certainly be a volunteer experience where you're reading. You're probably going to be a first reader of poetry, nonfiction, or fiction. It helped me so much when I was just starting out, to see what kinds of things we were responding to. What kind of landed with us,
Mm-hmm.
how it was different among all our editors. I might love a story, and Mike Ingram or Tom McAllister might hate it. We argued about stories. We rejected stories that then were published in places that had been around much longer and had bigger distributions. So it just showed me, like, immediately how incredibly subjective, completely subjective the whole process was. There's not a short story that's, a canonical, this is a good story and everybody would want to publish this story. It's completely subjective. I love it once a year or every other year when somebody sends around like a Hemingway story and then they can't believe it got rejected by all these places. Of course it got rejected. There's a 22-year-old reading a story that was written 75 years ago. Um, it should have gotten rejected. Um, but having that experience with Barrel House, just it made me so okay with rejection. I understand how it works now. Um, I understand it's really subjective and you're not going to connect with the right editor at the right time. Even when you feel like a story is really good, um, it might get rejected 20, 30, 40 times. I think the QAnon story here, which I felt like was the strongest traditional story in that group, that got rejected about 30 times till it landed with identity theory, and they loved it. So it just makes you realize how subjective it is. You're gonna grow a thick skin or you're gonna stop doing it, basically. And seeing that from the inside is super helpful.
You need to send your best work. You need to make sure that you think it's solid. If you have friends who will talk to you, see if they think it's solid. Sometimes the difference between acceptance and rejection is just a mystery. Nope, don't want
Yeah,
it. Nope, don't want it. Nope, don't want it. And then the same exact story, same exact version. We're so excited to publish this. Has anyone taken it? We want to make sure we get it. Please tell us right away. Like, can we publish
absolutely.
this?
Absolutely. Yeah, there were things that I would read, and I was just the exact right person to read that story at that time. Um, and I would be so excited to accept it or to make the pitch to the other editors, that we ought to publish this. Um, and there were times when I know that I rejected stories that were published in books and published in other places, and they just didn't land with me, or I was kind of sick of that type of story. Or I had read another one. Maybe we had published another one similar to it a year ago or something like that. So it just, yeah, just to see how subjective it is, that things land differently with different people. Um, it was really great experience for me. And like I said, just helps. It still helps me to this day. Just keep in mind, like when this book got rejected 20 times, I didn't fold it, and I didn't, you know, I didn't think, oh, either I suck or they suck. It didn't land. Um, and when it finally did land at the right place, I was thrilled because I know how hard that is too.